Three, two, one.
We'd like to welcome you to another edition of Grok Talk, brought to you by New Hampshire's leading conservative blog site, GraniteGrok.com. We are your feared, extremist, right-wing, hard-charging, gun-toting, opinionated, outspoken, rabble-rousing, letter-writing, radio microphone stomping conservatives and rational libertarians. So get ready for more news and opinion you could only get from GraniteGrok.com.
Grok Talk.
Welcome back to Grok Talk. We're happy to be here in the studio this week. A couple of guests. I don't have anything ready. You know what's weird? We're starting a little early today. Skip is calling Phil Kerpen right now. We're going to have him on to talk about death taxes. And we had to rush in and get everything all set up. And so we're a little bit behind schedule because not only do we have to set up, we're starting early. So we're going to bring Skip. We're going to bring Phil in right now and talk about that, and then we'll, once we're done with Phil, we'll go back to the regular thing. We'll talk about who's going to be on the program. And
hold on a second. Steve's going to bring you on right now.
You ready? All right, outstanding. Okay, well, Phil Kerpen was on the show March 22nd of last year. We almost booked him pretty close to the same weekend a year later. I thought maybe this will become this crazy annual thing where we have Phil Kerpen on the program. But welcome to Grok Talk, sir.
Hey, great to be here. If I'd known, I would have tried to make it our official annual.
It's our special day.
We'll have some noisemakers next year.
All right, so Phil's a leading free market policy analyst, advocate in Washington. Prior to American Commitment, he was a principal policy and legislative strategist for Americans for Prosperity. Worked for the Free Enterprise Fund, Club for Growth, Cato Institute, and he's joining us today. Last time we had him on, we talked about Obamacare delays. This year we're talking about death taxes. And you recently had an article in, I don't remember where the article was. Was it on American Commitment?
It was syndicated.
Syndicated?
Okay. A number of places.
All right, excellent. Let me turn this music down so I can actually hear what's going on here. So we're talking about death tax repeal. There's a lot of support for this, isn't there, repealing this thing?
Yeah, this is polls pretty much consistently over many decades now show this is the single most hated federal tax. And that's hard to do because people hate most of the federal taxes. But the idea that after you work hard, pay taxes your whole life, play by the rules, that when you die, there would be another layer of tax, a double tax on top of all that just for dying and trying to pass something on to the next generation. That really offends people. And, we've made a lot of progress on this tax. It used to be that the federal government could take 55% of everything above $1 million when you died. We've now got that down to 40% of everything above $5 million. And that higher exemption amount makes a big difference because a lot of family farms and businesses that are smaller, the exemption amount is enough to protect them. But you still have a major problem here with larger family businesses and farms that don't meet that exemption amount. And a lot of times the only way you can pay the tax is to sell off the business or to sell off part of your land or to liquidate capital. And so that has a very economically destructive effect. It's one of the most destructive taxes. It's probably the most destructive tax economically that we have in the code because all the other taxes tax income. This one taxes assets. It actually destroys the capital stock directly. And so it's a very destructive tax. Now, while we've made progress, a little bit of progress, increasing the exemption amount and decreasing the rate, we have not had a vote on repealing the death tax in the United States House of Representatives for nearly 10 years. The last vote was April 13th, 2005. And a lot of people are surprised to learn that because this is one of these issues where pretty much every Republican running for the House campaigns on this every time. And then they go and they don't vote on it. And they haven't voted on it. In fact, more than half the current House of Representatives has never voted on this issue in their life because they came to Congress after that last vote. And so we've been pressing very hard to have a vote. Let's pass this in the House. Let's try to pass it in the Senate. Let's not have any illusions here. I don't think we can break a Democratic filibuster in the Senate, and even if we did, we probably can't get President Obama to sign this. But we got to get back in the habit of having votes on it and talking about it and spotlighting the issue so that we can make it an issue for the presidential so we can finally get rid of this tax. And so we've got it out of the House Ways and Means Committee. It was a 22-10 vote. And we've been told that they're going to bring it to the floor this month. And just because sometimes leadership says that and it doesn't happen, we're urging people to write to their members and say, tell leadership to bring this to the floor for a vote. And we've got a little over 11,000 people who've done that through our website so far.
Is there any reason why they haven't had a vote? I mean, why? I mean, if it's so popular, why has it been so long?
It's that's a really good question. First of all, Nancy Pelosi was in charge of the House for 6 of those 10 years, or 4, I guess. She came in 6 and lost in 10. So for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, for basically 7, 8, 9, 10, Nancy Pelosi was in charge. So for 4 of those 10 years, it's easy to understand why. But for the other 6, when the Republicans were in control, there really isn't a good reason. My theory on this is they don't like the negative media that comes with doing this, because as much as the public wants to get rid of this tax, the editorial boards and the TV news talking heads, they go crazy. This is a giveaway to the rich. How dare you? The government needs the money more, and all this kind of thing. Yeah. And I've told them to embrace that, because every time the liberal editorial board calls you evil for loving rich people for not wanting to tax their stuff when they die, the public hears that, and they're with you. They're not with the liberals who are attacking you. And this is, there's a study that I mentioned in the column you've got in front of you. It was done by 2 Yale professors the last time we did a big push for repeal, about 10 years ago. And they looked at the entire history of the public polling on this issue. They're very liberal professors at Yale. They looked at the entire history of the polling on this issue, and they saw every poll that's ever been done shows support for repeal at least at 60%, sometimes as high as 70 or 80%. And they really couldn't figure it out. They were like baffled that the public wants to get rid of a tax that most of whom will not pay it themselves directly. But what they don't understand, and unfortunately what I think some Republicans don't understand, is that the vast majority of Americans think this tax is morally wrong, that taxing people at death with an extra tax, people who played by the rules their whole life, is wrong, whether they're going to pay that tax themselves or not. Not to mention, I think a lot of people understand that if the family business or farm that they work for has to shut down or liquidate to pay this tax, then they could be out of work. And so it's not just the people who pay the tax who sort of suffer the consequences. And so I think it's a fear of negative press, unfortunately, even though the public is not on the side of the press on this issue.
Yeah, they'd like to play defense rather than offense and bring this to the table and say, let's talk about this. They just don't even bring it up. So they're stuck arguing over things like the recent the discrimination bill in Indiana rather than the death tax. So it's a shame that they don't have the, let's say, fortitude to step up to the plate and take a winning issue across the line.
Well, look, I think the House is going to do it this month. I certainly hope we're going to pressure them as much as possible to do it this month. 10 years, to go 10 years between House votes on an issue like this is just unbelievable. It really is. And by the way, we ought to have this vote more than once a decade, even if we do get it this month.
Okay, so one of the things you talk about in the article is jobs and job losses versus job creation with regard to death taxes. You want to explore that a little bit?
Yeah, there have been two recent econometric studies, one from the Tax Foundation, one from the Heritage Foundation. They both found that full repeal of the estate tax would create over 100,000 jobs. So this is, as I said, this is not just about the people who pay the tax directly. There's also an economic impact, and it also has a significant impact on the capital stock, and that's very important for economic growth. And so this is one of these taxes where the economic destructiveness is so high that if you repeal the tax, the estate tax brings in about $20 billion a year for the federal treasury. And that's why Democrats, we can't lose out on that money. Government needs that money. And I'm kind of thinking, I think that somebody ought to be able to leave their money to their kids, not the government. I think their kids deserve it more than politicians and bureaucrats. But put that aside for a second. $20 billion a year is nothing in a $4 trillion federal budget. It's a speck. You can't even see it. And moreover, the tax is so economically destructive that if you eliminate it, there are now multiple studies showing that the revenue gains that you'll get from other taxes, from the higher economic growth as a consequence of that, will more than offset the $20 billion losses. So this is actually a net revenue gainer for the federal government as well.
Well, from what I know about farms, Ma and Pa aren't the only people that run the farm. Everything that goes and comes to the farm goes by truck. The implements that a farm uses to operate cost hundreds of thousands of dollars for the equipment and the maintenance. They hire seasonal help. They have full-time help. It's a going concern that feeds the rest of the area around it. When you're in an agricultural area, if it isn't for farms, where else do you work?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And, as I said, we have made a lot of progress on this issue, particularly, raising that exemption amount from $1 million to $5 million has helped a lot of farms avoid this tax. But still, a lot of farms still get assessed by the IRS at worth more than $5 million, and that's because you have a lot of farms increasingly that are in areas where the land values are being driven through the roof because you've got suburban sprawl coming, and the IRS comes in and says, well, we're going to value this land as if you wanted to build a subdivision here, and it's worth $50 million, and now you owe this amount of tax. And for a family that just wants to keep farming, the only choice they have is to shut down and sell the land in order to pay that tax. And so it's not as bad as it used to be because of the higher exemption amount, but it's still pretty bad, and the tax still hits 4,000 to 5,000 farms a year in this country. I'd like that to be zero. And when Democrats say we've solved the problem because the exemption amount's higher, I kind of, I try to suppress laughter because, number one, they fought us on raising the exemption. They wanted to lower the exemption. President Obama's budget this year lowers the exemption from $5 to $3.5 million. So when the Democrats say, oh, well, the exemption's so high, so we don't need to get rid of the tax, like, no thanks to you guys. And the other thing is, nobody should be hit with a tax after paying taxes and playing by the rules their whole life just because someone in the family died. And so, the exemption amount, getting that up, was an important victory, but we still need to keep making the case.
Well, I have a curveball for you. If Obama has engineered reparations to black farmers, we spent billions of dollars paying reparations to black farmers. Is this some sort of method to get it back within a generation? Is that what he's doing? Kind of a humorous thing there.
I don't know. I think the dollar amounts involved in that are probably enough that most of those people are under the exemption amount. But, certainly some of the more successful ones do get hit by this. And this has been an issue historically that's had a lot of black support. That last House vote that we had on this 10 years ago, 40 Democrats voted for it, and I think 12 of them were members of the Congressional Black Caucus.
Ooh.
And this time around, the Democratic co-sponsor of the House bill, the prime sponsor is a Republican from Texas, Kevin Brady. The Democratic co-sponsor is a black Democrat from Georgia, Sanford Bishop. And so this is certainly an issue where, the successful black family businesses and farms get hit by this. And, when you're coming at, I'm not big on the sort of the historical injustices and that kind of thing. But, to the extent that people look at that kind of stuff, it really does hurt minorities and especially blacks that haven't had many generations to build up wealth, that are coming out of slavery and then coming out of Jim Crow. They might have only had a generation or two to try to build something for their family, and then the death tax snaps it back. So it actually does hit them disproportionately hard for that reason.
The Democrats want to maintain Uncle Sam's plantation. They don't want them to own their own. That's probably the least racially most offensive way of saying it. I'm quite convinced that Democrats are not on the side of minorities.
Well, they want to harvest them for votes. That's for certain. But look, it'll be very interesting. I think the partisan environment has become much sharper in the past decade, and so I don't think we're going to see 40 Democrats vote for it again this time as we did in 2005. I think it'll be a much smaller number, but it'll be a very interesting vote to look at and to see which Democrats voted for repeal 10 years ago and are against it now, and to see if we can't make that a political issue for them.
So you mentioned possibly having it be filibustered in the Senate. What's the strategy for promoting this, the narrative, whatever, to get people in the Senate to vote for this thing?
Well, we had a test vote in the Senate on the budget. Senator Thune put up a test vote on death tax repeal on the budget, and he got 54 votes for repeal. So it's 6 short of the 60 you would need to break a filibuster. There was only one Democrat who voted for it, Joe Manchin from West Virginia. One Republican who voted no, Susan Collins from Maine, and so it was right at 54. I think it's going to be very difficult to get to 60. Now, of course, it's something they could include in budget reconciliation and do with 50. That's how they did it last time it was cut in 2001. But I think that the sense is that it's better to use that to focus on health care and trying to get rid of Obamacare. And so I don't think they're likely to do that. I do think that we need to push for, at a minimum, a vote in the Senate, a real vote, not a test vote, a live vote on the House-passed bill. And we've got to bring some pressure to bear on some of these Democrats. The map this time makes it a little tough to pressure people who are in cycle because there aren't a lot of Democrats in cycle because 2010 was such a Republican year. But there's certainly Bennett from Colorado should be vulnerable on this issue. Maybe someone like Murray from Washington State, which has a lot of timber that's been affected by this. Maybe someone like Dick Blumenthal from Connecticut, though that would be a stretch. But then you got these 2018 Democrats, many of whom are going to be extraordinarily vulnerable in this issue. And if we make clear to them that this vote's going to matter for that, you can bring people like Heidkamp from North Dakota, Donnelly from Indiana. And so I think, if we put a lot of pressure on, I don't think we can quite get to 60, but I think we can make it a very, very tough vote. And I think we can get close. And I think we can set ourselves up to where after the next presidential election, this is something we could actually accomplish. And so I don't want to get people's hopes up too high and think we're going to get this tax repealed this year. I think that's going to be very, very difficult. But I think the exercise of trying will be politically clarifying, and it's important to start voting on this again.
It amazes me, Phil, that, in this land of the free and all that we actually have a tax which is nearest, in fact, to the way the French tax their people, and not the way a free people pays for its government.
Yeah, I excuse me, I really agree with that. One of the principles of the U.S. tax system is that we don't tax assets, we tax income. Excuse me. And this tax deviates from that. It basically says if you have been successful, we're going to take a big percentage of it.
Steve,
sorry, guys, I'm getting over a cold here.
Hang in there, Phil.
Steve, you want to do your mid-session break?
Oh, yeah, we can take a really quick break, and you can get a drink or catch a breath or something like that. I wasn't ready. I was kind of sleeping at the switch here. Hold on a second. All right, Phil, hang on the line there. We'll be right back. We're going to take a quick break, and I'm going to find the way to play this thing. Here we go.
Hi, this is Rich Gerard, host of Gerard at Large in the Morning. The Manchester area's only locally owned, locally operated, focused, and interested, riveting radio show, heard live every Monday through Friday from 6 to 9 on 90.7 FM WLMW, New Hampshire Family Radio, and available 24/7 live or archived at GerardAtLarge.com. Be sure to tune in.
This is a coalition of New Hampshire taxpayers. We're located at 8 North Main in Concord, New Hampshire. This is a repository for all things conservative and municipal. So if you have a problem in your town, your school, your budget committee, the right to know law, and now the top of our list is voter fraud. You have a tip for us, some information for us, you want to join or help us out, cnht.org.
This is Grok Talk. We are speaking to Phil Kerpen from American Commitment about death taxes. Welcome back to the program. Don't forget to check us out on Facebook and Twitter. Look for us under Granted Grok. And of course, lots of places you can listen to this program. If you're not listening to it live now, you're listening to it podcasted, and we'll go through this a little bit later. Phil, you there?
I'm here, guys. Sorry about that.
I know, that's okay. Everybody gets the flu, and it's rough once you get that tickle.
If you believe it, I sounded a lot worse yesterday.
Did you really?
Yeah. But to your point, one of the things I point out in this column that I've seen very few other people point out, but I think is interesting. It's not a legal argument, but it's an interesting sort of philosophical point. The United States Constitution actually prohibits seizing someone's estate at death as a penalty for treason. The logic behind that being that you don't punish the next generation for the sins of the father and what have you. The idea that we would now seize 40% currently, it used to be 55% of an estate as a penalty for success, just for achieving the American dream, for doing absolutely nothing wrong. When we live in a country where our founders prohibited seizing an estate as a penalty for treason is, I think, pretty outrageous.
Well, let's face it, there's no penalty for treason anymore.
Well, yeah, that too.
Yeah, you're locked in the House or Senate chamber. That's what, pretty much for 40, 50 years.
Or White House.
You actually made me think, Phil, about an issue that we talk about a lot in New Hampshire, which is civil asset forfeiture, which keeps coming up every year in the State House. We keep trying to pass a bill to, limit it to criminal asset forfeiture. And it just, you're talking about the founding. You don't take people's property when, even for treason, and yet we have this other circumstance where the police will just seize property under the assumption that it had something to do with illegal activity.
Yeah, that's really outrageous. That's a huge problem we have across the country. And of course, unfortunately, even if you get a great state law passed on that, there are a lot of states that prohibit it, and the police force that just goes through federal asset forfeiture and get the money back and launder it that way. So even where you have state laws, they're not necessarily effective.
Well, unless the state laws prohibit federal agents from seizing assets, which they should.
Yeah. You guys should have my friend Eben Thampy from Americans for Forfeiture Reform on if you've never had him. He's had an excellent guest.
What's his last name?
Thampy, Thampy.
Okay, cool. Awesome. So what else are you guys doing over there at American Commitment right now that's hot?
We're still doing a lot of work on trying to stop the FCC order to regulate the Internet.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, that's been almost your life's work, fighting Bob McChesney, right?
It's been a major focus for a number of years, and we've been calling for Bob Menendez to resign for a while now, and he's been indicted. So
that might be in place right now with his own actions.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing is he's actually getting sympathy because it looks like it's politically motivated for critiquing the regime. I mean, I've read background. I know the guy deserves it. But
well, read the indictment. That's all I could say to people who think that. Read the indictment and then tell me that. I mean, I think it's pretty devastating. And more to the point, when all of this news first broke 2.5 years ago, I said this guy needs to resign because otherwise he's going to be totally at the mercy of this administration that can choose when to proceed against him, that can threaten him, that can have him under their thumb. And if he really cared about Iran or Cuba or any of these other foreign policy issues he says he cares about, he would have stepped aside then when it became clear that that they had the goods on him instead of waiting so that they could control the timing and when to move forward and what have you. And so this idea that this is all politically motivated, well, there may be an element of that here. But that's why he should have resigned in the first place, that he couldn't be manipulated or pressured in that way.
Hey, Torricelli did it, right? A couple of Rolex watches and money to girlfriends, and Torricelli stepped aside. He was a New Jersey U.S. Senator.
New Jersey's unbelievable, and they had that app scam guy in the 80s.
Yeah, back Harrison or something like that. Williams or Harrison, something like that.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, we got rid of the torch and we got the lout instead. I mean, New Jersey's incredible. That would be Lautenberg.
I'll just remind people who don't know that Cory Booker's in front of a grand jury as well related to the watershed shenanigans. And so it's like every statewide elected official in New Jersey's got legal problems.
Well, they just moved to Chicago when they're done with their terms in New Jersey. It is bad.
Crazy.
And what makes these guys stoop over and take bribes for what appears a very little amount, too.
Well, they think they can get away with it.
Yeah. And I guess Menendez has some ties to Harry Reid, who just fell down in the bathroom.
I don't think it was a coincidence that Harry Reid announced his retirement right before this indictment came out, because the indictment it doesn't legally implicate Reid, but the optics of it are disastrous for him. On sort of the bribe side, $600,000 that's named in the indictment as a political contribution to Menendez from this guy went through Harry Reid's super PAC. And on the quid pro quo side, it has Menendez enlisting Harry Reid's office to try to get this guy off the hook with his Medicare fraud dispute. And so Harry Reid's on both sides of this thing.
Yeah, the Senate was quiet when Harry Reid was running it, but they weren't quiet behind the scenes, apparently. Like the Torricelli kept, $2.9 million in campaign funds and was doling it out after he was out of office to friendly candidates that worked with the outfits he was lobbying for. Should have been picked up again for that, but hey, if we can get rid of him one way, we'll take it.
He'll probably get a job as a consultant anyway afterwards.
They never leave. Once they go to Washington, they appear never to leave. It's a very comfortable place for a certain.
That's a topic for another topic for a future discussion would be, people talk about term limits, but we had Senator Bob Smith on, and we were talking about term limits and staffers, and he says if you don't get rid of the staffers, it doesn't make a difference how many politicians you kick out of Washington.
Kennedy's.
That's what we've seen in California, where they have term limits and the staffers basically run the place.
Right.
The members come in and out in a few years; they don't even know what's going on.
Yep.
Right. Well, I mean, the comedy Yes Minister was based entirely on that principle that the man who's nominally in charge of the department or the senator's office or whatever really doesn't do anything. It's the liberal cretins behind the scenes that control everything, and he just has to go along. They just pretend that he's in charge.
Well, that's a huge problem we have in Republican administrations, that the career staff just basically say, oh, yeah, I'll do what you want to the politicals, and then they just sort of slow walk and they kind of think, I'll be here when you're gone, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and we have to understand that the bureaucracy trends liberal, and the only way you're going to solve this is by permanently shrinking the bureaucracy.
Well, Phil, we're kind of coming to the end of the segment. Contact information? Website?
AmericanCommitment.org is the website, and the top item in the front is the one on the FCC Internet regulation. But if you scroll down a little bit, our death tax action item's right there on the front page as well.
All right, great. Well, hope you feel better.
Chicken soup.
Enjoy your weekend.
And if you'd like to send along contact information for your colleague, we'll certainly reel him in for a future event, and we'd love to talk to you again soon.
All right. You got it, guys.
Have a great weekend.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye. All right, so Phil Kerpen, American Commitment. We got about a minute and a half. I just wanted to go through the typical morning stuff that we normally talk about. We're going to have Ed Nail is here to give us an update on vote fraud in the next segment. Huh? Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, so Ed'll be talking about what's going on in Dover. He's got a nice stack of cards here for us to look at. Then we're going to have Ron Moore, the storm chaser. He's going to talk about us weather and climate. And then Kimberly Morin. We're going to start with the Balsams bailout, but who knows where we're going to go with that. And then the last segment, we have the chair of the town council in Derry, Mark Osborne, who's going to come in and talk to us about his situation there with the unions and the budget. So a lot of stuff coming up. So stay tuned. We did start early. Officially, 9 o'clock
and that's
is our
another
start
case where the constituents would like to get the taxes reduced. They've actually elected legislators that would like to get a tax reduced. And lo and behold, the liberal machinery is ginning up fear and loathing to prevent the tax from being reduced.
Yep, and Kimberly Morin wrote a great article about that on Examiner. It's also posted at graniterock.com. You can go over there and take a look if you want to get a little advanced education on that topic before we get to it, as I poke around inside my bag and look for some stuff that I'm supposed to be reading but I don't have. So we want you to hang on for all of that stuff. Once again, don't forget to go to cnht.org and make a donation. Help support this program and their efforts. And please go to graniterock.com, see what we do, read what we write. Quite a bit there, not always on Facebook. Some of us are very good at transporting that into social media, and others of us not so much. So you want to make sure you visit the website.
And you're looking at one of them. I'm not so hot with social media. If something's really interesting, I'll put it out on LinkedIn. And you'd be surprised the number of times I get comments from the left coast when I put stuff on LinkedIn.
Well, you've been pretty busy lately, so you haven't been able to write. So that's not your fault that you haven't been able to do that either. So, all right, we're going to go into our break. Just trying to kill some time here while I wait for this music to start. And this is Grok Top. Skip had to leave us because he's not feeling well, but thanks for coming in and helping us get this all set back up. We'll be back in the next segment with Ed Nail and a little bit of voter fraud from Dover. Stay tuned.